This morning, Christopher McDavies. He is an American scholar, but he is teaching and researching at Oxford University, and he is an expert on Russian economy, Russian health, Russian defense industry, and because of the implications of the conflict in Ukraine on the Russian economy and the Russian relation with European Union and the United States. So I would like to ask Professor Davies to summarize your key conclusion on the situation now.
Yes, well, what I tried to do in my talk, which was looking at economic military balances and their influence on disputes, outcomes between major countries, alliances, and so on. In this case, between Russia on the one hand, NATO, EU on the other. So the earlier bit of my presentation was to look at Paul Kennedy's work on the rise and fall of the great powers, but then led on to the current situation. And probably it would be best if I just present some of my conclusions, because this is a podcast rather than a lecture. So basically what I said, using some historical evidence, is that in the Cold War period, the West's superior economic, technological, and military power was successful in maintaining the balance in Europe and put pressure on Russia, leading to eventually the breakup of the USSR and the emergence of democratic countries like Ukraine and Russia. So then I also talked about the 100 years of experience of the West in running economic sanctions against the Soviet Union, which I felt was relevant to the current sanction regimes. And the basic point about that is that despite best efforts of NATO and the countries in that alliance, that there was only limited success at changing the course of development in Russia. It built up into a major economic power, it developed all the weapons and so on. So economic sanctions can't be viewed as terribly effective instruments in changing the course of a country. Turning to the more current period, what I pointed out is that Russia does have a strong interest in developing close relations with the EU, and that was part of President Putin's 2020 strategy before he was elected to this current term. Obviously, the conflict over the Ukraine has complicated the situation both for the EU and Russia. But in the longer term, if a peace arrangement can be reached in Ukraine, then there are reasonable prospects for the EU and Russia to work together with Ukraine and develop those links in the longer term. What I felt is that one of the reasons that Russia had a bit more freedom of maneuver in Europe militarily than would have been the case in the past is that the NATO countries in Europe have dramatically scaled back their defense spending and reduced their military capabilities. So there's no longer a credible conventional deterrence in Europe as there had been in the Cold War period. Now, of course, everyone is now redeploying troops and saying they're going to increase defense spending, but that's after 20 years of doing the opposite. So I think that's relevant to this situation. And then if we look at the economies of Russia and Ukraine, which are participants in this conflict, although Russia is projected to have lower growth in the years ahead, it has been performing reasonably well macroeconomically, in part because it is a major exporter of energy, which the world has valued highly up until more recently. And prospects are that the world market price of oil will go up again gradually, and that will enable Russia to recover from what's probably going to be negative growth in 2015. The economic situation in Ukraine is far worse. Their economy is collapsing. They have a deficit on the state budget. They're heavily indebted externally, and they're now quite reliant on the EU and the IMF, the United States, to provide economic assistance to help them over the next couple of years. in return, the EU and IMF are demanding quite difficult economic reforms in Russia, in Ukraine, that it has not so far been able to implement. And in part that's because of the divided nature of the country, because when you carry out reforms, there are always losers as well as winners. And many of the losers are going to be those in large industries, coal mines, and so on, which could involve many parties in East Ukraine. And then if we look ahead at sanctions, my own assessment is that the Minsk Accord probably will hold, in that there won't be a return to large-scale military conflict. And if that's the case, then I would anticipate the EU will allow the sanctions to lapse when their first year comes up. And there will likely be a significant division between the EU and the United States over the situation in Crimea, because the United States has taken a firm line that its sanctions will remain in place until Crimea is returned to Ukraine and Ukraine regains its territorial integrity. Whereas my reading of the EU position is that a reduction in sanctions is possible even without dealing with the Crimea situation, which will be put on the back burner to be solved at some time in the future. So I think those are my main conclusions. I don't know if there's anything.
We appreciate very much. During his working session, he has emphasized the lack of analytic capability within the Europeans and the Western analysts in general with regard to the Russian situation. Russia. He is one of the leading experts in this kind of intelligence analysis. So that we appreciate very much your contribution to our understanding of the situation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation to come here.
We hope to keep in touch for the future.
Yes.
Thank you very much,
Good.
Professor Christopher Davis.
Thank you.